was born Muammar Mohammed Abu al-Ghadafi. Like every other child, no one knew at birth what the young Muammar Ghadafi would grow up to become. He grew up under the watchful eyes of his parents. He attended elementary and secondary schools in Libya. He later enrolled in the military. In 1969, he became the head of state of Libya and ruled till 2011, a period of 42 years. He was loved by most of his people and also loved by several persons across several countries of the world. He was also hated by many. In this edition of Back in History, we bring you the story of the rise and fall of Libya's most visible but most controversial figure in contemporary history. His name, Colonel Muammar Ghadafi. He was a long-standing leader of the Libyan Republic. He ruled for 42 years, but in 2011, he was killed in his hideout in the wake of the Arab Spring in what has become one of the most controversial killings in history. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. Gaddafi was born on 7th June 1942. He was born in Sirte, which at the time was in Italian Libya. His parents were not blessed with wealth. They were poor people, but it has been reported that they had a strong hold on the discipline of their children. The young Gaddafi grew up under the watchful eyes and parental care of his parents. He was the only son of his parents and the youngest of 4 children. Growing up, Gaddafi began to nurse an ambition for the military and later applied for enrollment. He successfully enrolled at the Royal Military Academy Benghazi. On completion of his training, he was commissioned into the Libyan army, from where he rose through the ranks. He attended several military courses at home and abroad and broadened his military skills and capabilities. While actively in the army, Gaddafi read the works of revolutionary figures extensively and began to develop his ideological standpoint on how Libya, his home country, should be governed. He frowned at the fact that Libya was colonized by the Italians and also frowned at the system of monarchy that was in place in his country at the time. Gaddafi then began to plan on how to stage a coup and unseat the then leadership of his country and bring to bear his ideas of leadership that, according to him, would transform Libya. He then founded a revolutionary group to work almost unnoticed, but with a firm resolve to seize power from the then monarch, Idris. In 1969, Gaddafi led a revolution, a coup, together with like-minded soldiers, which ousted the reign of the monarchy of Idris. On taking over the reins of power, Gaddafi made his first radio broadcast to the nation and stated as follows, unquote, "People of Libya, in response to your own will, fulfilling your most heartfelt wishes, answering your most insistent demands for change and regeneration, and your longing to strive towards these ends, listening to your incitement to rebel, your armed forces have undertaken the overthrow of the corrupt regime, the stench of which has sickened and horrified us all. At a single blow, our gallant army has toppled these idols and has destroyed their images. By a single stroke, it has lightened the long dark night in which the Turkish domination was followed first by Italian rule, then by this reactionary and decadent regime, which was no more than a hotbed of extortion, faction, treachery, and treason." End of quote. Having grabbed the reins of power, Gaddafi changed the nomenclature of Libya from a monarchy to a republic, and the republic was governed by Gaddafi's Revolutionary Command Council. He ruled by decree, and one of the first things he did was to drive Libya's Italian population out of Libya. He also ejected all Western military bases from Libya. He sounded a clear message that his government was for the people of Libya, and that during his reign, the people of Libya would have every reason to benefit from the natural resources of the country, which, according to Gaddafi, had been exploited non-stop for years by imperialist forces. Gaddafi was a strong adherent of the Islamic faith. As the military head of state of Libya, he introduced Sharia law in the whole of Libya. Sharia then became the basis for the legal system of Libya. Gaddafi promoted Islamic socialism in the whole of Libya. He turned his focus on the rich oil reserves of Libya and nationalized the oil industry and used the increasing state revenues to bolster the military and implement social programs for the people of Libya. His anger was that the oil wealth of the country had been exploited for several years by foreigners with little or nothing to show for it in terms of development. Gaddafi invested heavily in the building of accommodation for the people of Libya. He invested also in healthcare and education. In just a short period of time, Gaddafi transformed Libya and soon became the darling of the majority of his people. He transformed Libya into a new socialist state called Jamahiriya, which when translated to English means state of the masses. This was done in 1977. During his time as head of state of Libya, his welfarist policies brought smiles on the faces of several thousands and millions of Libyan citizens. For the majority of the people of Libya, Muammar Ghadafi was their best man and their messiah. They adored and made a hero worship of him. He shared the wealth of Libya with his people and had a welfarist system that provided various shades of intervention to the lives of the people. He built schools, constructed roads, hospitals, dispensaries, superstructures, and several other life-touching infrastructures in the country. Gaddafi governed Libya with a clear determination to change the country for the better and engender happiness for the greater majority of his people. Working assiduously with members of his revolutionary council, Gaddafi implemented several measures to change the narratives in Libya. The consumption of alcohol was prohibited. Nightclubs were shut down. Traditional Libyan dress was encouraged, with the president himself leading the example. Gaddafi doubled the minimum wage of workers in the country. He introduced statutory price controls and implemented compulsory rent reductions of between 30 and 40%, and all landlords and landladies were expected to comply. Gaddafi also wanted to combat the strict social restrictions that had been imposed on women by the previous regime. He advocated for the liberation of the female folk and established the Revolutionary Women's Formation to encourage reform to harness the potentials of the female folk. A law was introduced affirming equality of the sexes and insisting on wage parity. In 1972, a law was passed criminalizing the marriage of any female under the age of 16 and ensuring that a woman's consent was a necessary prerequisite for marriage. He insisted that the institution of marriage was too important to be done without the consent of parties, freely sought and freely given. Gaddafi's regime opened up a wide range of educational and employment opportunities for women for the first time in history. From the commencement of his administration in 1969, Gaddafi used money derived from oil to fund social welfare programs, which led to housing projects and improved healthcare and education in the whole of the country. House building became a major social priority, designed to eliminate homelessness and to replace the shanty towns created by Libya's growing urbanization. The health sector was also expanded. By 1978, Libya had 50% of more hospitals than it had in 1968. while the number of doctors had increased from 700 to over 3,000 in that same decade. Malaria was completely eradicated. Compulsory education was expanded from 6 to 9 years, while adult literacy programs and free university education were introduced. Beida University was founded during his regime, while Tripoli University and Benghazi University were expanded and well equipped for the needed human capital development intended for Libyans. In doing so, Gaddafi's government helped to integrate the poorer strata of the Libyan society into the educational system. Through these measures, Gaddafi's government expanded the public sector and provided employment for thousands of Libyans. These social programs proved popular with the people, and Gaddafi gained a near cult figure among his people. This popularity was largely due to Gaddafi's personal charisma and anti-imperialist stance and his determination to deploy the wealth of Libya for the benefit of the greater majority of its people. Gaddafi spoke with his people regularly using the mass media, and at some time he met face to face with the people. But Muammar Ghadafi was a man of many parts. He was popular for many good reasons and was also known for endless controversies. Just as he was loved by many, he was also hated by many. Gaddafi did not shy away from controversies throughout his tenure as the leader of Libya. He was especially critical of the United States of America due to America's support for Israel. Gaddafi thus decided to side with the Palestinians in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, viewing the 1948 creation of the State of Israel as a Western colonial occupation forced upon the Arab people. For this position held by Gaddafi, Gaddafi had no love for America. He was always on a collision course with successive presidents of the country. Gaddafi was accused of being the sponsor of the Lockerbie air crash of December 21, 1988. Gaddafi denied any involvement, but several years after, he offered to pay compensation to families of the deceased. He was also accused of sponsoring rebel warlords and offering them training and finances to embark on violent change of government in many countries in Africa. He did not hide his disdain for the superpowers that exploited, according to him, the resources of the smaller countries. He was hated by such superpowers. At the 64th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Gaddafi did the unexpected. He abused the United Nations of double standards and accused them of gross inability to checkmate the excesses of the superpowers. Gaddafi then threw the United Nations Charter to the floor in the most disdainful manner. He was widely criticized as being rude and uncouth, but Gaddafi tendered no apology for his action. At the start of his administration, Gaddafi was pro-Arab. He formed alliances across borders and championed the ideas of Pan-Arabism and dedicated himself to it. His position was that his ancestors were Arabs and that he was, by implication, Arab. He held on to this for some time, for several years, until he fell out with some of the then leaders of the Arab countries. From 1999, Gaddafi shunned Pan-Arabism and encouraged Pan-Africanism. He advocated that Libya was a country with strong African roots, thus his decision to support and champion the African cause. Whatever Gaddafi believed in, he went all out for it. When he pledged his support for the African cause, he did so with all his strength and with every needed support he could offer. He paid a visit to one of Africa's highly respected heroes, Nelson Mandela, in South Africa. He attended the meetings of African heads of state and took active part in their deliberations. In due course, he was chairperson of the African Union from 2009 to 2010. During his tenure as chairperson, he advocated for the formation of the United States of Africa, where, according to him, citizens would enjoy several benefits across the continent. He insisted that Africa was too wealthy to beg for financial assistance abroad. That if the wealth of Africa were duly harnessed and effectively managed, Africa will be a comfortable place to live in, and that Africa will have enough money to even lend to countries in Europe and other continents. Gaddafi held the view that Africa is the richest continent on earth. Whenever there was a meeting of the heads of states of Africa, Gaddafi would always tell them to stop going abroad to borrow money. Gaddafi dominated Libya's politics like a colossus for 4 decades and 2 years. He was decorated with various awards by his people and praised for his anti-imperialist stance. Though criticized on various fronts, Gaddafi led a prosperous Libya. The average Libyan was afforded decent living. It was not all rosy, but the people of Libya had witnessed the development in all spheres of life during Gaddafi's regime, in spite of Gaddafi's human rights record. For Gaddafi, Libya was number one in his priority list. His reign was, however, brought to a tragic end in the wake of the Arab Spring, which swept across several countries in the Arab world and caused the removal of a number of heads of states. Gaddafi was caught in this web. Following the start of the Arab Spring in 2011, Gaddafi spoke out in favor of Tunisian President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, who was at the time seriously threatened by the Tunisian revolution. Fearing domestic protests, Libya's government under Gaddafi implemented preventive measures by reducing food prices, purging the army leadership of potential defectors, and releasing several Islamist prisoners. This proved ineffective, and on 17 February 2011, major protests broke out against Gaddafi's government in Libya. Gaddafi described the protesters as rebels and also accused them of being drugged and linked to Al-Qaeda. Gaddafi promised that he would never leave Libya for them. He announced that the rebels would be hunted down street by street, house by house, and wardrobe by wardrobe. He then ordered the army to open fire on protesters in Benghazi. This was done, and hundreds of citizens were killed. Shocked at the government's response, a number of senior politicians resigned and defected to the protesters' side. In reality, Gaddafi had made a serious miscalculation, and the hit on him would soon become unbearable. Angered by the reaction of Gaddafi's government, the uprising spread quickly through Libya. In no time, cities such as Benghazi, Misrata, El Beida, and Tobruk were taken over by protesters. Men, women, children, and the elderly were part of the protest. The situation went out of control, and like what happened in the other Arab states, the demand of the protesters in Libya was the immediate end of Gaddafi's rule. Analysts have stated that at some point the protest was sponsored from abroad, and that the target was to use the opportunity of the Arab Spring to remove Gaddafi at all costs and by all means. There was a real problem at hand for Gaddafi, and the protesters were unrelenting. They had support from several quarters, and the ultimate mission was the removal of Gaddafi. Money and weapons were provided from abroad for them to use in removing Gaddafi at all costs. Military assistance was also given from abroad. All was not well, and Gaddafi was in serious trouble. On 30 April 2021, a NATO airstrike killed Gaddafi's sixth son and 3 of his grandsons in Tripoli. In June, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Gaddafi, his son Saif el-Islam, and his brother-in-law Abdullah Senussi, head of state security, for charges concerning crimes against humanity. Things had really gone bad for Gaddafi at this time. He had to run into hiding to save his life. His major strongholds had been broken and most of his loyalists had been killed and chased into exile. All was indeed not well with Gaddafi. Gaddafi then took a decision to escape from Libya and take asylum in Burkina Faso. It is reported that he moved close to the border to leave the country but had a last-minute change of plan and decided to move to his hometown of Sète. Gaddafi got it wrong by this decision. This is where he was killed. While in a convoy of numerous vehicles and several bodyguards in Sète, NATO bombers attacked, destroying at least 14 vehicles and killing at least 53 people. The convoy scattered and Gaddafi ran to a construction site and ran inside a drainage pipe while his bodyguards battled the rebels. In the battle, Gaddafi suffered head injuries from a grenade blast. Gaddafi was then manhandled and inflicted with serious injuries by his assailants. He was then arrested and put into a pickup truck. He lost so much blood and fell off as he was driven away. His semi-naked, lifeless body was then placed into an ambulance and taken to Misrata, and upon arrival, he was found to be dead. Gaddafi had lost so much blood and could not have survived the attack. The official NTC account claimed that Gaddafi was caught in a crossfire and died from bullet wounds. This official account was, however, contradicted by gory images of the manhandling of Gaddafi by some group of people whose activities were recorded with the use of mobile phones and posted raw to the internet. Other eyewitness accounts claimed that rebels had fatally shot Gaddafi in the stomach. Whatever may have been the exact manner that Gaddafi was treated, the fact remains that Gaddafi was killed in his hometown of Sète. His body was put in a freezer and displayed for Libyans to view for 4 days. On 25th October, the leadership of the NTC, the group that took over from Gaddafi, announced that Gaddafi had been buried at an unidentified location in the desert. This was done to avoid turning his gravesite to a pilgrimage center by those who held Gaddafi in the highest imaginable esteem. This brought to an end the life and times of Muammar Ghadafi, the Libya's strongest, most glamorous, most controversial, most vocal, most hated, most criticized, but most loved leader by a segment of the Libyan people of all time. Analysts have said that since the assassination of Muammar Ghadafi, Libya has not been the same again till today. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to the channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host, Ekemini Udim.